The world of magic doesn't end with the turning of a page. Love rises and falls anew, forbidden like poison or blazing like a phoenix's flame. The heroes we thought we knew uncover their hearts once more. So step into the enchantment of emotion and welcome to a world where love is written anew. The snow never melted in the north. It lay across the highlands like a silvery shroud, catching the last light of the sun before it sank behind the ice-crusted peaks. The air shimmered faintly with frost magic, ancient, proud, and fading. From the highest tower of the citadel, known as the Northern Crown, a figure stood alone, pale against the twilight, the wind tugging at his cloak. Draco Malfoy, King of the North, was not yet 30, but already his silver-blonde hair had the sheen of moonlight, and his face bore the quiet lines of responsibility. He had inherited his father's throne after Lucius's death, and his mother's cautious grace. But he had inherited something else too, a curse upon the land that no spell could lift. The frost was spreading. Slowly, silently, it crept from the mountain passes into the heart of his realm, turning forests to glass and villages to stone. Even his people, those of the old bloodline of wizards, were not spared. There were whispers that the magic itself was dying, that the north would soon be only ice and shadow. Draco turned from the window, the hem of his black cloak brushing the marble floor. "They said the southern delegation will arrive by sundown," he asked his steward, a wiry man with a fur-lined robe. "Yes, Your Majesty," the man replied nervously. "The envoy is led by Minister Granger herself." Draco's mouth tightened. Hermione Granger. The name carried weight even in these frozen halls. She was said to be the most brilliant witch of her age, the Minister of Magic for the Southern Lands, and one of the architects of the new world that had risen from the ashes of the war, a world that had left his family behind. "She comes to negotiate peace," the steward added quickly, sensing the tension. "Peace," Draco murmured, almost to himself, or power disguised as peace. He waved the man away and turned once more to the window. Outside, snow was falling in soft spirals, coating the battlements, the statues, the carved iron gates. The Northern Crown had stood for 1,000 years, built by wizards who drew power from the stars and storms. Yet even its ancient stones could not resist the creeping frost forever. Down in the courtyard, a column of southern riders appeared, cloaks of crimson and gold fluttering against the pale snow. At their head rode a woman, her figure straight and purposeful, her curls bound against the wind. Hermione Granger had come to the north. The gates opened with a thunderous groan, and the delegation entered. Hermione dismounted gracefully, her breath misting in the frigid air. Her brown eyes swept over the courtyard, the banners, the guards, the statues half buried in snow, before settling on the figure descending the steps to meet her. "King Malfoy," she said, her tone measured, her gloved hand extended. "Minister Granger." His voice was even, polite, but his eyes, cold, grey as the northern sky, studied her with quiet curiosity. "Welcome to the Northern Crown. I hope the journey wasn't too harsh." "Only as harsh as your weather," she replied lightly. "But I've faced worse storms." Something like amusement flickered briefly in his gaze. He took her hand, and for the briefest instant, warmth, faint, startling, passed between them, as though their magic recognized each other. Inside, the citadel gleamed with restrained grandeur. Torches burned with blue flame, casting crystalline reflections along the stone walls. The great hall was vast, lined with tall windows that framed the snowy expanse beyond. As they walked, Hermione noted how empty the place felt. Not of people, courtiers moved silently along the periphery, but of life. The air itself seemed weary. "I was told," she began as they approached the council chamber, "that your land suffers from something unnatural." Draco's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "The Frostbane," he said at last. "An old curse, older than my crown. It feeds on magic itself. And yet you've survived," Hermione said softly. "That's not nothing." He glanced at her. "Survival is the North's oldest art." That night, in her guest chambers overlooking the frozen courtyard, Hermione couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, her reflection pale against the glass. The moon hung low over the mountains, and the wind whispered faintly, a sound like sighing voices carried from far away. She had come here as a diplomat, not a savior. Her task was simple: negotiate an alliance, ensure stability between North and South, and return home. But the moment she stepped into that hall, she had felt something stirring in the air, something older than politics. The prophecy came back to her then, words whispered in secret council months ago. "When the sun weds the snow, balance shall return. Two shall stand against the fading, and magic shall breathe anew." She had dismissed it as myth. She always did. But now, watching frost creep along the edge of her window, she wasn't sure. Hermione pressed her hand against the glass, tracing the outline of a flake. Beneath her touch, it melted slightly, just enough to leave a mark. In the courtyard below, Draco Malfoy stood alone, cloak drawn tight against the wind. He looked up, as if sensing her gaze. Their eyes met, hers filled with quiet determination, his with something unreadable. The snow fell thicker between them, veiling the distance, but neither turned away. In that moment, the North seemed to breathe. The next morning dawned pale and silent, as though the world itself were holding its breath. The sun's light barely pierced the curtain of snow, and the air was so cold that it shimmered faintly, like glass about to crack. Hermione wrapped her cloak tightly around her shoulders as she made her way through the corridors of the Northern Crown. The castle's vastness was overwhelming. Its ceilings vaulted like frozen cathedrals, its walls carved with runes that glowed faintly under torchlight. At breakfast, she found Draco already seated at the head of a long obsidian table. His black coat was trimmed with silver fur, a circlet of steel resting on his pale hair. He looked every bit the king his people needed him to be: distant, controlled, untouchable. "Minister Granger," he greeted her as she approached. "I trust you slept well." "As well as one can," Hermione replied, her tone polite. "When one's windows hum with ancient curses." His lips curved faintly. "The castle sings to those who listen. Some find it unnerving." "I find it tragic," she said, seating herself opposite him. "It feels wounded." That caught his attention. For a heartbeat, his grey eyes softened, and Hermione thought she saw the weight he carried flicker across his expression. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual cool detachment. He gestured toward the servants, who placed crystal goblets of steaming tea before them. "Our lands may be divided, Minister," he said, "but we share one gift: the tendency to see what others refuse to see." She looked up, surprised by the remark. "Then perhaps we'll find common ground yet." Perhaps. The council convened in the Hall of Stars, a vast circular chamber where the ceiling shimmered with constellations painted in enchanted silver. There, representatives of the North and South gathered around a map etched in frost and flame, the borders of their realms glowing faintly under charm work. Hermione laid out the Southern proposal: trade routes, magical cooperation, a shared archive of spellcraft. It was practical, balanced, and entirely unromantic. But she could feel the unease in the room. The Northern Lords watched her with suspicion, their fur-lined cloaks like the pelts of wolves. To them, the South was indulgent and soft. Draco sat at the table's end, silent, his gaze never leaving her. When she finished, he rose. "The South offers fair words," he said slowly. "But we have learned that peace can be a chain if forged by the wrong hands." A murmur rippled through the council. Hermione met his gaze evenly. "And the North's pride can be a wall so tall it blocks out the sun," she replied. He smiled, not with mockery, but with the faintest glimmer of respect. "Then perhaps we are both trapped by what we were born to protect." Afterward, when the council adjourned, Draco found her standing before a tapestry depicting the founding of the Northern Crown. Wizards kneeling before a mountain of ice, their wands raised toward the sky. "You speak boldly," he said, his tone unreadable. "I speak truth," Hermione replied. "That's what you summoned me for, isn't it?" "I summoned you because the South's power is waning," he said, "and the North's is dying. The Frostbane will not stop with us. It spreads through ley lines, through the veins of magic itself. If it reaches your lands, even your sun will freeze." Hermione turned sharply. "You think I don't know that? I've seen the signs in the South. Spells fail for no reason. Charms lose their strength. The world's magic is unraveling." "Then perhaps," Draco murmured, stepping closer, "we are not enemies at all." Their eyes met, not as diplomat and king, but as two souls staring into a same abyss. That evening, snow fell harder than before. The sky turned to iron, and the wind howled like something ancient waking from a dream. Hermione stood in the castle library, a massive hall that smelled of parchment and cedar. Thousands of tomes lined the shelves, their spines inscribed with frost runes. She had come searching for answers, not to the political puzzles of the day, but to something older, more elusive. Her fingers brushed the edge of a book bound in silver-threaded leather, Chronicles of the Northern Founders. As she opened it, dust rose in glittering motes. The text was written in both Latin and a script she barely recognized. One phrase stood out, illuminated in pale blue ink. "From the union of sun and snow, magic shall bloom anew." Her heart quickened. The prophecy again, here, recorded centuries before her birth. She turned the page, reading by wandlight. The founders of the North and South had once been bound by a pact. Two great houses, one of fire, one of frost. Together they maintained the equilibrium of magic across the land. But when their heirs broke their vow, the balance shattered, and the Frostbane was born. It wasn't just legend, it was history. A soft voice came from behind her. "You've found the same truth I did." Draco stood in the doorway, the torchlight painting his features in shadow. Hermione closed the book slowly. "Then you know what it means." He stepped forward. "It means our worlds were never meant to stand apart. The South is warmth without restraint, The North is order without compassion. Both are dying because neither can exist alone. Or, she said, because they refused to forgive each other. He paused, the silence between them stretching like a drawn bowstring. Perhaps, he said at last, but if the prophecy is right, then what's required is a union, Hermione finished softly, between sun and snow. Their gazes locked again, and for a moment the air seemed to hum. It was more than the resonance of magic. It was something alive, threading between them, fragile yet undeniable. Then, without warning, the torches flickered out. The library plunged into shadow. A low tremor shuddered through the floor, sending books tumbling from their shelves. Draco seized Hermione's arm, pulling her away as a shelf cracked and collapsed, scattering pages across the marble. The tremor faded as suddenly as it had begun. When the silence returned, the air was colder, unnaturally so. The frostbane, Draco breathed. It's spreading faster. Hermione's pulse raced. Your people. They'll be safe, he said, though his eyes betrayed doubt. The wards still hold, for now. As they stood among the fallen books, their breath clouding in the frigid air, Hermione realized something profound. This wasn't a war of power or pride. It was a race against time. And whether she wanted to admit it or not, her fate was now entwined with his. That night, as the storm raged, Hermione lay awake once more, staring at the canopy above her bed. The walls seemed to whisper, soft, mournful voices echoing from centuries past. She thought of Draco, of the burden he bore, of the loneliness in his eyes. And beneath all her careful logic, something began to stir. Not trust, not yet, but something perilously close to hope. The blizzard howled for 3 days without pause. Its winds lashed the towers and battered the gates, until even the oldest stones seemed groan beneath the strain. The Northern Crown, fortress of 1,000 winters, had never faced such fury. From her chamber window, Hermione watched the storm claw at the sky, its white breath swallowing the horizon. The world beyond was gone. There was only the storm and the sound of it. Inside, torches guttered and died one by one, their flames snuffed out by unseen drafts. The castle lived and breathed around her, shifting, creaking, sighing with ancient weariness. Hermione's wand never left her hand. Though she tried to focus on her work, her mind drifted back to the library, to Draco's voice, to the feel of his hand pulling her from the falling shelves. It had been weeks since she'd seen him truly smile. Perhaps he never did anymore, but she had seen the man beneath the crown, weary, determined, and haunted by the ghosts of his family's legacy. On the third evening, when the storm finally began to fade, a knock came at her door. "Enter," she called, setting aside the parchment she had been scribbling on. Draco stepped inside, his cloak dusted with snow. He looked drawn, as though sleep had been a stranger to him. "The frostbane has reached the outer villages," he said quietly. "We've lost 3 settlements in the last week." Hermione rose to her feet. 3. Her voice trembled despite herself. "I thought your wards—" "They held for centuries," he interrupted. "But now, they crack. Even the runes my ancestors carved are dimming." She studied him for a long moment. His composure was perfect, his tone level, but there was something brittle beneath it, something breaking. "Then let me help," she said. He hesitated. "Help? You brought me here to negotiate peace. But peace will mean nothing if your realm turns to stone. Let me see the villages. Let me study the curse up close." His eyes flickered with uncertainty. "It's dangerous. The Frostbane is not like ordinary magic. It drains power, life, even memory. Those who linger too close forget who they are." "All the more reason to understand it," Hermione insisted. "Please, Draco. You said yourself this storm will not stop at your borders. Let me help you fight it." He said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded. "At dawn, we ride." The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world glazed in glass. The snow lay unbroken across the plains, shining with a hard, cold beauty. Hermione and Draco rode together at the head of a small escort, their breath rising in mist. The villages they passed through were eerily silent. Doors hung open, frozen mid-swing. Fields lay buried beneath glittering frost. Even the trees seemed petrified, their branches like skeletal hands reaching skyward. They stopped at last before what had once been a hamlet, now only a scattering of ice-sculpted homes. Hermione dismounted, crunching through the crusted snow. The air felt wrong here, heavy with a kind of sorrow that pressed against her chest. She knelt beside a well, its water frozen in a perfect spiral. "It's beautiful," she murmured, "and terrible." Draco joined her, his eyes scanning the horizon. "It starts as beauty," he said. "That's the curse. The Frostbane seduces before it destroys." Hermione raised her wand and whispered, "Revelio." The ice shimmered with faint runes, fragments of old northern wards that glowed dimly, their lines cracked and broken. She traced one with her finger, feeling a faint pulse beneath the surface. "These wards were forged with life magic," she said. "They need renewal, not through power, but through balance." He frowned. "Balance?" "Sun and snow," Hermione whispered. "Fire and frost. Your ancestors knew this. The founders who built the crown used both elements to anchor the ley lines." Draco's eyes darkened. "And when the South betrayed that bond, the balance shattered," she finished. "The Frostbane was born from the wound." They stood in silence, the wind sighing around them. Hermione turned to look at him. "If we could restore the bond, even temporarily, perhaps we could stop it from spreading." His gaze met hers, sharp, assessing, and strangely hopeful. "You mean to join our magics?" "I mean to try." They began that night. In the ruins of the old temple that stood on the village's edge, Hermione drew a circle of runes on the ground, one half inscribed in the southern script of flame, the other in northern frost runes. The two halves shimmered, uneasy together, as though reluctant to touch. Draco stood opposite her, wand in hand. The moonlight silvered his hair, casting pale fire across his features. "If this fails," he said softly, "it could destroy us both." Hermione met his gaze. "If we do nothing, it will destroy everyone else." For a heartbeat, he looked at her, truly looked, and the coldness in his eyes faltered. Then he lifted his wand. "On your mark, Minister." She took a deep breath and raised her own. "Now." Light flared. Fire met frost in a violent surge, colliding with a hiss that split the air. The circle blazed, gold on one side, silver on the other, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Hermione felt the magic tear through her like a storm, fierce and wild. She saw flashes, mountains cracking, rivers freezing mid-flow, stars falling like embers across the sky. The past and the present merged in a single heartbeat. She heard voices, ancient and sorrowful. Sun and snow must stand together, or all shall fall to silence. Then the light subsided. Hermione staggered, catching herself on the frozen altar. Draco rushed forward, steadying her. His hands were warm despite the cold. "You're bleeding," he said. She touched her temple, finding a thin line of blood. "Just a scratch. Did it work?" He turned toward the runes, and for the first time in years they glowed fully, blazing with steady light. The ice around the temple began to crack, melting into water that steamed softly against the cold. A small miracle. Hermione exhaled, her breath misting. "We did it." Draco looked at her for a long moment. "You did it. Not alone." Their eyes lingered on each other, longer than was wise. The magic still shimmered between them, fragile and alive. And for an instant, Hermione felt the air grow warm, as though spring itself had drawn close. But then, from the shadows, a sound echoed, a whisper like shattering glass. The warmth vanished. The frostbane had not retreated. It had moved. Before Hermione could speak, frost erupted along the temple walls, racing toward them like living fire. Draco shouted a spell, conjuring a barrier of light. It shattered instantly. "Go!" he yelled. But she didn't run. She thrust out her wand and shouted, "Protego Solis!" Golden fire flared from her hand, colliding with the oncoming frost. The impact burst outward in a shockwave of light and cold that threw them both to the ground. When the brilliance faded, the frost was gone. Hermione gasped for air. Draco knelt beside her, his face pale, his breath ragged. "You could have been killed." "So could you," she said hoarsely. Their hands met in the snow, his gloved, hers bare, and for a moment the world fell silent. Above them, the moon hung full and unblinking. The temple ruins glowed faintly gold where the magic had struck. And though neither spoke it aloud, both knew the same truth. The prophecy was not a myth. It had already begun. By dawn, the temple ruins were still smouldering with faint light. Frost and fire mingled across the stones in shimmering rivulets, as though the world itself could not decide whether to burn or freeze. Hermione and Draco rode back to the Northern Crown in silence, their horses' hooves crunching over ice-slick paths. Neither spoke of what had happened, but both felt it, the hum of their joined magics still echoing through their veins, stubborn and alive. When they reached the citadel gates, the guards looked on in uneasy awe. The sky above them had changed. For the first time in a decade, the dawn's rays pierced the northern clouds, staining the snow in streaks of pale gold. The people whispered that it was an omen, that the king and the southern minister had tamed the storm. But Hermione saw it differently. The magic they had awakened was unpredictable, a sleeping force that had merely stirred, not yielded. Inside the great hall, warmth seeped back into the air. Firelight flickered over the marble floor, casting long shadows behind them. Hermione's robes were scorched in places, her hair still dusted with frost. She looked both exhausted and luminous, like a flame that refused to die. Draco turned to her as the servants scurried away to fetch healers. "You should rest," he said. "You pushed your magic beyond its limit." "I've done worse," she murmured, attempting a faint smile. "You forget how many times Harry and I almost died before breakfast during school." He gave her a look, dry, faintly amused. "You find death amusing?" No, she said, meeting his gaze, but I find survival worth a smile. Something softened in his expression, a fleeting crack in his composure. You're not what I expected, Granger. And what did you expect? He hesitated. Someone who'd lecture me on ethics while the world froze over. She lifted her chin. Give me time. I still might. A faint laugh escaped him then, short but real. Hermione blinked. It was the first true laugh she had heard from him. It vanished almost as quickly as it came, but it left something behind, a warmth in the air that even the Frostbane could not touch. That evening the castle stirred with rumour. The southern envoy was restless, sensing shifts in the political wind. The northern lords, proud and suspicious, murmured of danger, of old magics returning that might unseat the natural order. Hermione found herself summoned to the Council of the Crown. The chamber was filled with nobles wrapped in furs, their faces pale and hard as marble. At their head sat Lord Mornath, an old advisor whose beard shimmered with frost crystals. You meddle with forces beyond your right, Minister, Mornath said coldly. The Frostbane is a curse woven by the gods. To touch it is to defy the balance of our land. Hermione stood tall, unflinching. The balance is already broken, my lord. I merely seek to mend it. Mend? The old man's eyes flashed. The North has endured for centuries. We need no southern witch to tell us how to guard our power. Before she could reply, Draco rose from his seat. That's enough. His voice carried a weight that silenced the room instantly. Minister Granger acted under my order. If you question her, you question your king. A murmur rippled through the council, but none dared to answer. Mornath bowed stiffly and stepped back. Hermione glanced at Draco, surprise flickering in her eyes. He met her gaze briefly, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, fragile but deep. Later, as the council dispersed, Hermione found herself walking the torchlit corridors alone. Her footsteps echoed softly against the stone. Somewhere in the distance, a harp played, a mournful tune that drifted like a ghost through the air. She followed the sound, winding through halls she had not yet explored, until she came to a smaller chamber she did not recognize. There, seated by a window glazed with frost, Draco played the harp. The melody was haunting, a song of winter, of silence, of longing buried beneath centuries of snow. Hermione lingered at the doorway, unwilling to interrupt. But he looked up and saw her, fingers stilling on the strings. It's an old northern hymn, he said quietly. My mother used to play it when I couldn't sleep. It's beautiful, Hermione said softly. And sad. He gave a faint nod. Most beautiful things are. She stepped closer. The light of the fire caught her face, softening her features. You hide a great deal behind that crown, Draco. Do I? His eyes gleamed faintly. And what do you think you see beneath it? Someone who's afraid to believe in hope, she said. Someone who still thinks the past defines him. He studied her for a long moment, the air between them charged. And what if it does? Then change it, Hermione whispered. You have that power. We both do. For a heartbeat, it felt as if the world narrowed to that single space. The flicker of firelight, the soft hum of the harp's strings, their breath mingling in the cold air. Then Draco looked away, breaking the spell. Hope, he said quietly, is a dangerous thing in the north. And yet, she replied, it's the only thing that ever warms it. The days that followed were uneasy. The frostbane retreated briefly, then struck again, fiercer, as though enraged by their defiance. The golden streaks in the sky dimmed. Villages once saved began to falter anew. Hermione poured herself into research, her chambers filling with scrolls and maps. Draco joined her often, though neither admitted how natural their partnership had become. They worked late into the night, arguing over runes, tracing ley lines, deciphering prophecies that hinted at places long forgotten. One evening, as snow fell in slow spirals outside the window, Hermione pushed a parchment toward him. "Here," she said, tapping an ancient map. "The nexus point, where the ley lines meet. It's beneath the mountains, under the citadel itself." Draco frowned. "Impossible. Those tunnels have been sealed for centuries." "Then we unseal them." He looked at her sharply. "You would risk everything on a myth." She met his eyes. "You already have." The silence that followed was thick with more than tension. In it lay something tender, something neither dared name. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "If you're wrong, I'm not." He exhaled slowly, surrendering to the inevitable. "Then we go beneath the crown." That night, as Hermione prepared for the descent, she found herself staring out her window once more. The moon was high, cold and indifferent. Yet somewhere beyond it, she imagined warmth, a promise of something still possible. Behind her, a knock sounded. Draco entered, cloaked in black, his silver circlet glinting faintly. "The tunnels won't welcome us," he said. "They were sealed by magic older than Hogwarts itself." "Then it's time they remembered us," Hermione replied. For the first time, he smiled, not the careful smile of a king, but something real. "You truly are dangerous, Granger." She met his gaze, her heart steady. "So are you, Draco. The difference is, I know it." He laughed softly, then offered his hand. "Then let's tempt fate together." Hermione hesitated only a moment before taking it. His hand was warm, his grip firm. As they stepped into the shadowed corridor that led toward the heart of the mountain, the torches flickered one by one, as though bowing in reverence. The air grew colder, heavier with the pulse of ancient magic, and somewhere in the dark, far below the stone and snow, something vast stirred, waiting for them both. The descent began beneath the oldest wing of the northern crown, a section of the citadel untouched by sunlight for centuries. The stairway spiraled downward into the mountain, narrow and damp, carved from dark stone that seemed to hum faintly beneath their boots. Every few steps, frost glimmered in the torchlight like tiny veins of silver. Hermione walked beside Draco in silence, her wand raised for light. Behind them, the last echoes of the castle faded, replaced by the low murmur of moving air and the occasional drip of unseen water. The deeper they went, the stronger the pulse of magic grew. Faint at first, then steady, like the heartbeat of something slumbering beneath the earth. These tunnels were built by the first northern mages, Draco said quietly. They used them to channel the ley lines, to bind the kingdom's magic to the mountain itself. My father forbade anyone from entering after the curse began. He said the air down here drives men mad. Hermione glanced at him. Perhaps he feared what might be found. "Perhaps," Draco murmured. "Or perhaps he feared that what sleeps here might wake." Their torches flickered. For a brief moment the air shifted, colder, sharper, whispering like distant voices carried on the wind. Hermione stiffened. "Do you hear that?" He nodded. "The mountain remembers." The stairway ended at last in a vast cavern. Its ceiling soared high above them, lost in shadow, while the floor shimmered with thin layers of ice. In the center rose a black stone dais encircled by runes carved deep into the rock. The air thrummed with power so old it seemed to press against their chests. Hermione approached the runes slowly, brushing snow from the markings. "They're a binding ward," she murmured. "Not meant to keep people out, but to keep something in." Draco's expression darkened. "The Frostbane." She shook her head. "No, something older. The curse was born here, but it wasn't the source." As she spoke, a faint light began to shimmer within the runes, ghostly white, like moonlight on water. The air grew colder still. Hermione's breath misted as she turned to Draco. "It's responding to us, to our magic." He stepped beside her. "Then let's see what it wants." They raised their wands together. The runes flared, and a column of light erupted from the center of the dais, swirling upward in a spiral of frost and fire. The force of it sent wind whipping through the cavern, extinguishing their torches. Hermione stumbled, and Draco caught her arm, pulling her close as the light expanded into a vast, translucent shape. Neither man nor beast, but something in between. Its voice was a whisper that filled the cavern. "Who dares disturb the crown's heart?" Hermione swallowed hard. "We are not enemies," she said. "We seek to heal what was broken." The light pulsed, and the voice turned colder. "Broken by your kind, the southern flame that betrayed its oath." Draco stepped forward, his voice steady. "And yet, without her fire, your frost will die. The curse consumes us both." The spectral figure turned its hollow gaze toward him. "You wear the blood of the North. You should kneel before the old order, not defy it." Hermione moved between them, her magic rising in defense. "He kneels to no curse. Nor do I. The world above is dying. If we cannot restore balance, there will be no North, no South, nothing." For a long moment, silence. Then the light shuddered, dimming. "Balance," it echoed. "You speak the ancient word, the covenant of sun and snow." Hermione felt her heart quicken. "Yes, tell us how to restore it." The voice seemed to sigh, a sound like the cracking of ice. "The bond was forged by love and shattered by fear. Only love freely given can awaken the crown again." The light flickered, then vanished. The cavern fell into darkness. Draco stood motionless, his breath visible in the cold air. "Love?" he said at last, almost disbelieving. "That's your grand solution?" Hermione lowered her wand, exhaustion settling into her bones. "It's not about us," she said softly. "It's about what our people lost. Unity, trust, the kind of love that holds a world together." He looked at her then, the faint light catching in his grey eyes. "And what if the prophecy doesn't speak of nations?" She froze. "What if it speaks of two people?" he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sun and snow, fire and frost." Hermione's throat tightened. "Draco!" But he turned away before she could finish, his expression unreadable. "Come," he said. "The Frostbane will not wait for us to ponder riddles." They made camp in a small alcove near the cavern's entrance. The air was too cold for fire, so Hermione conjured a sphere of soft golden light that hovered between them. Draco sat across from her, his cloak draped around his shoulders, the faintest sheen of frost clinging to his hair. "You should rest," he said quietly. "You look ready to fall." Hermione shook her head. "If I sleep, I'll dream, and I can't afford that right now." He tilted his head. Dreams frighten you?" "No," she said, staring into the light. "But they make me remember." He studied her for a long moment. "You've seen too much loss." "So have you," she replied. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was deep, like the quiet that lingers before dawn. Finally, Draco spoke again. "When I was a boy," he said, "my mother told me the North would one day thaw, not by war or magic, but by choice. I never believed her. But lately—" He trailed off. "Lately?" Hermione prompted. He met her gaze, and there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, vulnerability, bare and unguarded. "Lately, I wonder if she wasn't speaking of the land at all." Hermione's pulse quickened. She wanted to speak, to say something that would break the tension coiling between them, but no words came. Then, from deep within the cavern, came a low rumble, the sound of shifting stone. The ground trembled beneath them. Hermione leapt to her feet, wand ready. "What is it?" she asked. Draco's face was pale. "The frostbane." A crack split the ice near the dais. From it seeped a dark mist, glimmering faintly blue. It moved with purpose, coiling like a living thing. Hermione raised her wand, but the mist surged forward, faster than thought. "Protego!" she cried, casting a shield around them. The mist struck it with a hiss, spreading across the invisible barrier like ink in water. Draco joined his magic to hers, and the air blazed with silver light. The combined force pushed the frost back inch by inch until it retreated once more into the fissure. When it was over, Hermione sank to her knees, panting. The golden sphere above them flickered weakly. Draco knelt beside her. "You're bleeding again," he said softly, brushing a streak of blood from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was light, but it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. She looked up at him, eyes bright with exhaustion and defiance. "If that's what it takes to save your world, then so be it." "Our world," he corrected gently. Hermione's lips parted, but no words came. They stayed like that for a moment. Two figures in the dark, their magic mingling, the cavern around them humming softly with new energy. Far above, in the frozen air of the northern crown, the first crack of thaw echoed faintly, a whisper of spring in a land that had forgotten warmth. And deep within the mountain, the frostbane stirred once more, its voice a hiss carried on the cold. "The union has begun." They returned to the surface under a sky of blood-tinged clouds. The storm had not ceased. It had only changed its voice. The snow now fell in slow, deliberate flakes, heavy as ash. Hermione could feel the pulse of magic running beneath the earth, restless and awake. Whatever they had touched in the depths of the mountain had not been silenced. It had been roused. The northern crown greeted them in uneasy silence. The guards bowed as Draco passed, but their faces were pale. Whispers followed their steps through the torchlit halls, of omens, of ancient power reborn. Some called it a blessing, others called it a curse. In her chambers, Hermione stripped off her frost-stained cloak and sank into a chair before the fire. Her hands still trembled faintly. She could see the cavern every time she closed her eyes. The runes, the light, the shadow that spoke. "Love freely given," it had said. A riddle or a warning. She barely noticed when the door opened behind her. Draco entered without ceremony, his expression unreadable. He looked as if he had been walking the halls for hours, unable to rest. "The frostbane is changing," he said quietly. "Our wards are holding, but the snow no longer obeys the winds. It's moving where it pleases." Hermione looked up, meeting his gaze. It's alive. He nodded once. A living curse. You said it yourself, born from imbalance, and now it feeds on both our worlds. She leaned forward, her voice low. Then the prophecy was right. It can't be fought by power alone. It needs something else. Draco's eyes flickered toward the fire. Something you still believe in? Hermione hesitated. Hope isn't a belief. It's a decision. He gave a faint, bitter smile, spoken like a true Gryffindor. For a long while, neither spoke. The flames danced between them, casting shadows across the walls. Finally, Hermione said, "The spectre called the cavern the crown's heart. If the curse began there, it must end there too, but not by force, by restoration." Draco's brow furrowed. "You mean the covenant?" "The union," she whispered. "Sun and snow." His gaze sharpened. "And if the old words mean what we think they do, then the bond must be real," she said, voice trembling despite herself. "Freely given. Not a spell, not a treaty, but a choice." Draco took a slow step closer, the sound of his boots barely audible on the stone. "And what would you choose, Hermione Granger?" Her heart stuttered. The air between them felt charged, fragile. She opened her mouth, but before she could answer, a horn sounded from the outer wall, sharp and urgent. Draco turned instantly. The Frostbanes reached the gates. They ran through the corridors, the sound of chaos rising. The northern soldiers were already forming ranks in the courtyard, wands drawn, cloaks whipping in the wind. A white mist was creeping over the outer ramparts. Not snow this time, but frost that moved like smoke, devouring everything it touched. Hermione joined Draco on the battlements. The sight below stole her breath. The plains surrounding the citadel had become a field of glass. Every tree, every rock gleamed with ice. At the center of it all was a figure, tall, pale, and wreathed in blue fire. "It's taken form," she whispered. Draco's jaw tightened. "The Frostbane." The figure raised its head. Though its face was blurred, its voice rang clear and cold as bells. "King of Snow, child of the traitor flame, the world you rule is mine." Draco lifted his wand. "You will find it hard to reign over ruins." The creature laughed, a sound that made the ice crack. "You think your crown means power, but even kings must kneel to the frost." A wave of blue light burst from its hand, striking the wall. Hermione threw up a shield charm, deflecting the blow, but the impact sent shards of ice spraying through the air. "Fall back to the inner ward," Draco shouted to his soldiers. Hermione caught his arm. "No, it's here for you, and for me. The cavern bound our magics together, remember? It wants what we started." He looked at her sharply. "Then what do you propose? We invite it in for tea." She met his gaze steadily. "No, we finish what we began." The battle that followed was unlike any war Hermione had ever seen. Magic crackled through the air in violent surges, frost meeting flame, each strike echoing through the mountains. The Frostbane's power was relentless, but it seemed to weaken near Draco, as though uncertain of the man it had once chosen as heir to the North. Hermione fought beside him, her wand blazing gold against the storm. The air grew so cold her breath crystallized, but she pressed on, matching his every movement as if guided by something older than memory. Together, they drove the creature back toward the gates, where the runes of the crown glowed faintly beneath the snow. But just as victory seemed within reach, The frostbane shifted. Its form dissolved into mist, then reappeared behind them, its voice a whisper of triumph. Two halves cannot destroy what was born from their division. It struck. The blast threw Hermione backward. Her wand flew from her hand, vanishing into the snow. Pain flared through her side, sharp and cold. She tried to rise, but the frost was already creeping up her leg, turning her skin pale as marble. Draco's shout cut through the roar of the wind. He knelt beside her, his magic flaring in desperate waves. "Stay with me." She managed a faint, strained laugh. "You sound like Harry." "Don't," he said hoarsely. "Don't speak." But she did. "You can't win alone. You know that." He looked at her, truly looked, and something inside him broke. "Then what do I do?" Her hand trembled as she reached for his. "You trust me." Their fingers met. The moment they touched, a surge of warmth burst from their joined hands, blazing gold and silver at once. The frost recoiled, hissing. The frostbane screamed. The power between them ignited, spiraling upward like a storm of light. Hermione felt her strength return, not drawn from within herself, but shared, intertwined with his. They rose together, their hands still clasped. Draco's voice joined hers as they cast the spell that came unbidden to their lips. Ancient words neither had ever learned, but both somehow remembered. "Solis et nivis, unum cor." The ground shook. The light became blinding. The frostbane shrieked and splintered into shards of blue fire that scattered across the sky like shattered stars. The storm broke. When the light faded, the courtyard was silent. The frost that had covered the walls melted, running down in streams of clear water. The air was still, not with death, but with calm. Hermione swayed. Draco caught her before she fell, his arms strong around her shoulders. She looked up at him, her face pale, her eyes bright. "It worked," she whispered. He didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the clouds were parting for the first time in living memory. A faint band of gold touched the snow. At last, he spoke, his voice low. "No, Hermione, we worked." She smiled faintly before exhaustion claimed her. Draco lifted her into his arms and carried her toward the great hall, past soldiers who bowed in silence as they passed. Behind them, the last remnants of the frostbane faded into mist, carried away on a rising wind. And for the first time in generations, the north breathed, not the breath of winter, but of something new. Hope. Hermione woke to the soft crackle of firelight. For a moment, she thought she was still dreaming. The room smelled of pine and old stone. The air, though cool, no longer bit at her skin. When she opened her eyes fully, she saw she was in a chamber unlike any she had known in the Northern Crown. The walls were draped with woven banners of silver and blue. The ceiling hung with crystals that shimmered faintly in the light. Her first thought was confusion. Her second, realization. The frostbane was gone. The battle was over. Then came pain, dull and steady, curling up her side like the echo of ice. She shifted, wincing, and a shadow moved beside her. "Easy," Draco said softly. He sat in a chair near the hearth, his cloak thrown over the back, his hair tousled as if he hadn't slept in days. He rose at once and came to her side. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. I thought—" He stopped himself, but she heard what he didn't say. Hermione pushed herself up on her elbows, ignoring the ache in her chest. 2 days, she repeated. "What happened?" You destroyed a curse older than the kingdoms themselves, he said dryly. The North hasn't seen sunlight in years. Now look. He gestured toward the window. Hermione followed his gaze and gasped. Outside, the world had changed. The snow still lay thick across the plains, but it glittered under the touch of a pale sun. Meltwater ran from the battlements in thin silver streams, and in the distance she thought she saw a faint blush of green where the frost had receded. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Draco's expression softened. "It's alive." Hermione turned back to him. "The frostbane is gone then." He hesitated. "Broken," he said finally, "but not destroyed. A curse like that leaves roots. They may sleep, but they remember." She nodded slowly. "Then we'll have to watch for them." "We," he noted silently. "Not you, not the North. We." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. "You should rest more," he said at last. "The healers were astonished you survived at all." Hermione smiled faintly. "It's not the first time I've been underestimated." "No," Draco said, almost smiling in return. "It isn't." Days passed, and the castle began to thaw with the world beyond its walls. Fires burned brighter. The great halls echoed with voices again. The people of the North emerged from their fear like sleepers waking from a long dream. For the first time in centuries, the kingdom felt alive. And yet, peace brought its own restlessness. Hermione spent her hours in the archives, poring over tomes to understand what they had awakened. The joining of their magic had done more than repel the frostbane. It had altered the ley lines themselves. Where once the power of the North had been cold and rigid, it now shimmered with faint warmth. She found Draco there often, watching quietly as she worked. He rarely interrupted her, but his presence filled the room all the same. One evening, as she traced the runes of an ancient map, she felt his eyes on her and said without looking up, "You're not very good at pretending not to stare." He raised a brow, though she could hear the faint amusement in his voice. "You mistake vigilance for vanity. I'm ensuring you don't accidentally open another fissure in the earth." Hermione looked up. "And if I did, then I'd close it." She smiled. "So we balance each other." Draco's expression shifted. Something flickered there, brief and uncertain. "It seems so," he said quietly. The following week brought envoys from the south. Word of the North's thaw had spread quickly, carried by rumour and owl alike. The Southern Council wanted to know the truth. Hermione had dreaded this moment from the start. The delegation arrived at noon, 6 wizards and witches draped in gold-trimmed robes, bearing the seal of the ministry. At their head was Thomas Burke, the current deputy minister, clever, ambitious, and entirely too observant. "Minister Granger," he greeted her with an overly formal bow. "Your letters were brief. The council is most eager for a full account." Hermione forced a diplomatic smile. "Then you shall have one." Draco stood beside her, regal and silent, his crown glinting in the pale light. Hermione could feel the tension radiating from him. The Southerners watched him with a mix of curiosity and caution, and perhaps a little fear. Burke cleared his throat. "We heard tales of a battle, of the frostbane itself rising against your forces, and of a union of magics." His gaze slid between them, sharp and knowing. Surely that was an exaggeration. Hermione kept her expression composed. The frostbane was a manifestation of imbalance, she said smoothly. The solution required cooperation, nothing more. Cooperation, Burke repeated as though tasting the word. I see. Draco's voice was cool as the northern wind. If the South doubts our word, you're welcome to spend a night beyond the walls. The frost remembers how to bite. The delegation blanched slightly, and Burke cleared his throat again. That won't be necessary. When they left hours later, their curiosity half sated, Draco turned to Hermione with a faint smirk. You lied well. I prefer to call it diplomacy. He leaned against the doorway, studying her. And if your council learns what really happened about the bond, what then? Hermione hesitated. Then they'll see it as power, a weapon to be used or feared. Perhaps they'd be right. No, she said firmly. It's not power, it's connection. That's what they never understand. He looked at her for a long moment. You really believe that? I have to. That night, a quiet celebration filled the castle. The great hall was draped with garlands of winter pine and silver banners that caught the light like starlight. Musicians played, and laughter, real laughter, echoed through the corridors. The people toasted their king and the southern envoy who had saved them. Hermione stood at the edge of the hall, watching. She felt strangely apart from it all, as though the joy belonged to another world. Then Draco appeared beside her, 2 goblets in hand. You should try enjoying the victory, he said, offering her one. You earned it. I'm not good at celebrations, she admitted. He smiled faintly. Neither am I. They drank in silence. Around them, the hall glowed with warmth, but beneath it, Hermione felt a different current, something quiet, uncertain, pulling her toward him like gravity. When she looked up, he was already watching her. For once, he didn't look away. I never thanked you, Draco said softly, for saving my kingdom. You did, she replied, when you let me. He took a step closer. The noise of the hall seemed to fade. You changed everything, Hermione. Maybe we both did. His hand brushed hers, a simple touch, but it felt like fire and frost meeting all over again. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. Then a bell rang, the signal of the night's end, and the moment broke like glass. Draco stepped back, his composure returning like a mask. The hour grows late. Hermione nodded, though her pulse still raced. Good night, Your Majesty. He inclined his head. Good night, Minister. Later, alone in her chamber, Hermione stood by the window and looked out at the sleeping kingdom. The snow glowed faintly under the moonlight, no longer harsh, but soft, as if the land itself breathed easier now. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that their story was far from over. The frostbane might have been driven back, but the prophecy's final words still echoed in her mind. Only love freely given can awaken the crown again. The world was healing. But balance, she knew, demanded more than peace. It demanded truth. And in the silent depths of the northern crown, beneath the stone and frost, something ancient stirred. Not in anger this time, but in waiting. Spring came hesitantly to the north, like a stranger uncertain of its welcome. The snow retreated in glimmering rivers, and patches of green began to emerge along the lower slopes of the mountains. The people called it the Queen's Thaw, a whispered blessing born from gratitude and superstition alike. They said the southern witch had brought warmth to their cold-blooded king, and through him to the land itself. itself. Hermione heard the words in the halls, but pretended not to. Rumors were as common as frost in the north, and she had learned to let them drift past like snowflakes. Still, she could not deny that something within her had shifted, something she didn't dare name. Every morning she walked the ramparts alone, her breath soft in the mild air. The thaw smelled of wet stone and pine, of life returning. She should have been glad. Yet part of her feared what came next. Magic, like nature, was cyclical. Nothing woke without something else sleeping in its place. The frostbane was dormant now, but she felt it, distant and restless, in the farthest corners of the kingdom. Draco had become quieter since the battle. He ruled with a calm authority that surprised even his oldest advisors. He listened, measured, commanded, but often his gaze would drift toward the horizon, as though seeing something only he could perceive. When he spoke to her, his tone was softer than it used to be, though he hid it beneath irony and restraint. One evening, after a day spent reviewing border treaties, Hermione found him alone in the courtyard. The light was fading. The snowmelt ran in narrow streams at their feet. He stood beside the great stone fountain, once frozen solid, now flowing freely, staring into its mirrored surface. "You should be resting," she said. He didn't look up. "I've slept enough for one lifetime." Hermione walked closer, her cloak brushing the wet stones. "You've rebuilt more in 3 months than most kings manage in 10 years. Even heroes are allowed to be tired." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "You think me a hero?" "I think you're trying to be something better than what came before," she said gently. "That's harder than heroism." He glanced at her then, eyes catching the fading light. "You sound as though you understand." "I do." She paused, then added, "The war changed us all. We just wear different scars." The wind stirred, cool and clean. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Draco said, almost absently, "When the frostbane came, I thought my line would end with me. I didn't imagine I'd see this. Sunlight over my kingdom, people laughing again." Hermione smiled faintly. "And yet, here you are." He turned toward her, and something unguarded passed through his expression. "Here we are," he corrected softly. Later that week, the council gathered once more in the Hall of Stars. The southern delegation had long since departed, but their absence left questions hanging like cobwebs. Trade needed reopening. The northern borders needed guarding. And, most pressing of all, the balance of magic between their lands had begun to change. Hermione presented her findings before the assembled lords and scholars. Maps shimmered across the air at her command, lines of golden light tracing the ley currents that ran through the world. "Since the breaking of the frostbane," she explained, "the ley lines have begun to merge again. The southern flow of magic is reaching farther north, while the northern currents push southward. It's as though the world itself is re-knitting what we tore apart." Lord Mornath, ever skeptical, narrowed his eyes. "And what happens when these forces meet in full? Will they clash or destroy each other as before?" Hermione met his gaze evenly. "That depends on how we guide them." Draco's voice joined hers from the high seat. "The North and South will need to act as one. Any attempt to control the flow alone will fracture it again. I will not allow that." The council fell silent. None dared challenge him. Hermione felt a small flicker of pride, not at his authority, but at his conviction. The boy she once knew at Hogwarts, arrogant and cruel, was gone. In his place stood a man who had learned humility through loss. When the council adjourned, Draco lingered by the great windows, his gaze lost in thought. Hermione approached quietly. "You handled them well," she said. He gave her a wry glance. "I learned from the best politician in Britain." She laughed softly. "I'm not sure whether to be flattered or offended." "Flattered," he said without hesitation. Her laughter faded into a small, contented silence. "The ley lines will stabilize in time," she said. "But when they do, the connection between us, between our magics, may not fade." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You say that as if it troubles you." "It doesn't trouble me," she said quietly. "It reminds me." "Of what?" "That the price of balance is never simple." That night, Hermione dreamed. She was standing again in the cavern beneath the mountain, but it was changed. The runes no longer glowed blue. They blazed gold and silver, weaving patterns that pulsed like living veins. The voice of the spectre echoed faintly around her. The bond was forged by love and sealed by sacrifice. The ground trembled beneath her feet. Light burst upward, and in its heart stood two figures, one of fire, one of ice. They reached for each other, hands almost touching, but as their fingers met, both began to fade. Hermione woke with a gasp. Her heart was pounding. The dream lingered like smoke, too vivid to ignore. She threw on her cloak and left her chamber, the corridors silent save for the soft murmur of her steps. She found Draco in the library, asleep at his desk, surrounded by scrolls. The candle beside him had nearly burned out. Hermione hesitated, watching him for a long moment. His face in sleep looked younger, unguarded, free of the weight he carried while awake. "Draco," she whispered. He stirred, blinking into the dim light. "Hermione." "I had a dream," she said, voice trembling slightly. "The spectre, it spoke of sacrifice, of love. I think the prophecy isn't finished." He straightened, fully awake now. "Explain." Hermione paced, her hands moving as she spoke. The frostbane was only part of it. The prophecy said balance would return, not that it would stay. Magic is shifting again, Draco. Faster than I expected. The ley lines are merging too quickly. If they collide without guidance, it could unravel everything we've done. His jaw tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying something must anchor them. Something. Or someone." He stood in silence for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "And you think it's us?" She nodded. "Our bond created this change. It may be the only thing that can stabilize it." He stepped closer. "And the sacrifice." Hermione's voice barely rose above a whisper. "The bond can't hold if we stay divided. North and south, two halves of a whole. One must give up their claim to the magic of their land, merge entirely with the other." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You mean one of us must yield our magic?" "Yes." The words hung between them, cold and final. Draco exhaled slowly. "Then it will be me." "No," Hermione said sharply. "You can't. Your people need peace," he interrupted. "And they'll have it. You've given them life again, Hermione. But this is my burden, my kingdom, my curse. It ends with me." She shook her head, stepping forward. "I won't let you." He reached out, catching her hand. His touch was steady, though his voice was not. "You've already given enough. The South needs you. The world needs your light." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. And who will hold the north if you're gone? He smiled faintly. You will. The words struck her like a blow. Not cruel, but final, inevitable. The prophecy's meaning, the union of sun and snow, had never been political. It was personal. A love freely given, sealed by loss. Hermione's heart ached as she whispered, there must be another way. Draco's gaze softened. If there is, we'll find it, together. But even as he said it, she saw the truth in his eyes, and feared that the price of balance would be higher than either of them was ready to pay. The days that followed Hermione's dream were heavy with silence. The castles seemed to sense what neither of them dared say aloud. The fires burned lower, the corridors felt colder, and the air carried the brittle stillness of a storm waiting to break. Even the people of the north, who had begun to laugh and sing again, spoke in hushed tones. They could feel the change in the magic, faint tremors beneath the snow, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Hermione threw herself into her research, refusing to let despair take root. In the library, she surrounded herself with stacks of tomes, her quills scratching tirelessly through the night. She read until her eyes blurred, searching for any mention of an alternative, any hint that the prophecy could be fulfilled without loss. But every text, every fragment pointed to the same truth. Balance demanded sacrifice. Draco avoided her for 3 days, though she knew why. The moment they met again, she would try to stop him, and he could not afford her persuasion. When he finally appeared in the library doorway on the 4th night, she didn't look up from her book. "You've been hiding," she said. "I've been preparing," he answered. His voice was calm, almost too calm. Hermione set her quill down and turned to face him. The sight of him startled her. His usually immaculate robes were wrinkled, his eyes shadowed by exhaustion, but there was a quiet resolve in him that frightened her more than anger ever could. "You've already decided," she said softly. "Yes." "Draco, listen to me." He shook his head. "I have, and I've listened to reason long enough. The North has always demanded a price from its kings. Mine will be the last." "You're talking about erasing yourself," she whispered. "The Union will merge your magic with the ley lines completely. You'll cease to exist as you are." He met her gaze, his grey eyes steady. "Then let me be what this land needs. It's all I've ever wanted, to make something right." Hermione's throat ached. "You already have. Don't you see? You've changed everything just by choosing to fight. Don't make me lose you now." Something flickered across his face. Pain, quickly masked. "You once told me that hope is a decision. This is mine." She stood abruptly, fury rising with her grief. "You can't ask me to accept that." "I'm not asking," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to live." At dawn, the alarm bells rang across the citadel. The ground shuddered underfoot, and frost began to spread once more across the courtyard stones. The frostbane had awakened again, stronger than before, its tendrils of blue flame coiling toward the heart of the northern crown. Hermione and Draco stood together on the battlements as the sky darkened to silver grey. The air tasted of snow and magic, sharp and alive. Below them, soldiers shouted and spells flared in the gloom, but the frost devoured them as swiftly as breath on glass. "It's feeding on the ley lines," Hermione said, gripping the parapet. "The magic's collapsing. If it reaches the mountain's heart, then there will be no north," Draco finished grimly. Hermione turned to him, desperation breaking through her composure. "We can find another way. There isn't one." He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "You saw what the spectre said. Love freely given. It isn't asking for blood. It's asking for surrender. I can give that." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "No. You'll give yourself to the frostbane. You'll vanish into it." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His hand lingered, gentle, almost reverent. "If that's the cost, then it's worth paying. You gave me something no magic ever could, Hermione. You made me believe again. In peace, in light, in something more than survival." Her breath caught. "Don't say goodbye." "I'm not," he whispered. "I'm saying thank you." Before she could stop him, he turned and strode toward the courtyard steps, his cloak billowing like shadow against the snow. Hermione followed. She didn't think, didn't breathe. The frost beneath her boots burned cold, creeping like veins of blue fire across the ground. The soldiers fell back as Draco advanced, their king a figure of silver and determination. At the center of the courtyard, the frostbane had taken form, a storm given shape, a towering spectre of ice and light. Its voice was a chorus of echoes. "Foolish king, you cannot unmake what you are." Draco lifted his wand. "Perhaps not, but I can choose what I become." The frostbane's laughter split the air, cold and merciless. "You would bind yourself to the storm? You will be forgotten, swallowed by the frost." Hermione stepped forward, her own wand raised. "He will never be forgotten." Draco turned sharply. "Go back." "No," she said. "Not without you." Their eyes met, a collision of will and love and grief. "You can't do this," he said. "I won't let you do it alone." The frostbane shrieked, and the air exploded with blue light. Hermione and Draco were thrown apart, their magic flaring wildly. She felt the ley lines beneath them surge, screaming through her blood like fire. The prophecy's words echoed in her mind. Only love freely given. And in that moment, Hermione understood. It wasn't Draco's sacrifice alone that would save the world. It was their bond. Two magics intertwined, refusing to yield to division. She forced herself to her feet, pain stabbing through her ribs. "Draco!" He looked up, eyes wide with realization as she reached for him. Their hands met, and the world erupted in light. Gold and silver spiraled around them, burning away the frost. The frostbane screamed, its form fracturing like glass. The magic between them blazed brighter until there was no distinction between north and south, sun and snow. Only harmony, fierce and brilliant. Hermione felt warmth flood through her, followed by sorrow so deep it hollowed her heart. Draco's magic twined with hers, his thoughts brushing her mind like a whisper. "Don't grieve. This is peace." She tried to hold him, to keep him there, but he was already fading, his form dissolving into light that shimmered like falling snow. "Draco!" she cried, but the wind swallowed her voice. The last thing she heard was his whisper. "You are the North now." When the light faded, the courtyard was still. The frostbane was gone, its shadow erased. The air was warm, impossibly warm. Snow dripped from the rooftops in gleaming rivulets, and somewhere far above, the first bird sang. Hermione knelt where Draco had stood. The stone beneath her hand was hot, pulsing faintly with life. A single silver crown lay upon it, half melted, its edges glowing with faint gold. Tears slid down her face, but she smiled through them. The prophecy had been fulfilled. The union of sun and snow had restored balance to the world, not through conquest, but through love. And though the king was gone, the land remembered him. From that day forward, the north no longer knew endless winter. The peoples spoke of a queen who carried both fire and frost in her veins, who ruled not through fear, but through mercy, and who every dawn stood upon the citadel balcony, her gaze lifted toward the light. For sometimes, when the wind blew just right, she swore she could hear his voice in it, soft, steady, and unbroken. The years that followed became known as the years of balance. The north no longer slumbered beneath endless frost, and yet it did not lose the clarity that winter had once brought. Seasons returned slowly, shyly. First the budding of frost flowers along the valley streams, then the soft greening of the pine slopes, until at last true spring touched even the mountain peaks. The people rejoiced, for they believed their king's soul had become one with the magic of the land. They said when the northern winds blew gently, it was his breath. When the auroras shimmered in silver arcs across the sky, it was his spirit watching over them. But for Hermione, joy was a quieter, more difficult thing. She ruled in Draco's stead because the Northern Council had begged her to stay. She wore no crown and called herself no queen. But she guided them as he would have wished, with patience instead of pride, with courage where once there had been fear. Each decision she made felt like walking a blade, half memory, half duty. Yet even grief softened, as all things must. She found herself learning the patterns of this strange land, the songs of its rivers, the hidden paths between its forests, the language of snow as it fell upon stone. The people grew to love her not as a ruler, but as something gentler, a guardian of what Draco had left behind. Every morning she rose before dawn and walked the battlements. From there she could see the valley, and, beyond it, the mountains that hid the ancient cavern where everything had begun. The runes that once glowed with frostfire now shimmered faintly with a light like dawn. Neither flame nor ice, but something between. The balance was alive, and she could feel it beating in time with her own heart. Yet sometimes, when the wind was still and the stars hung low, she could almost hear him, a whisper at the edge of thought. "You are the North now." Those words haunted her, not in sorrow, but in wonder. For though she ruled alone, she never truly was. The land itself had become a presence, vast and aware, and within it she felt traces of his magic, the memory of his voice, the steady pulse of his resolve. One night, as the northern lights shimmered across the sky, Hermione sat before the hearth in her chamber, quill in hand, parchment spread before her. She had begun to write a history of the war against the Frostbane, not for herself, but for those who would come after. The younger wizards of both North and South had grown up in peace, and she feared they might one day forget how fragile that peace had been bought. Her handwriting was precise, though slower than it once had been. She wrote of the prophecy, of the ley lines and the ancient curse, of Draco's sacrifice and the magic that had remade the world. When she reached the final pages, she hesitated. What could she write of love, when love itself had become something beyond words? As she pondered, the fire flickered and the temperature in the room dropped slightly. Not cold enough to harm, only enough to make her breath mist faintly in the air. Hermione looked up, her heart tightening in her chest. The light on the hearth shifted from gold to silver. "Draco," she whispered, half fearing her own hope. For a heartbeat, the room felt alive. The shadows deepened, the air thickened, and she sensed the unmistakable brush of another presence. Then, faint as snowfall, came his voice, clear and calm, exactly as she remembered. "You keep your promises." Tears blurred her vision, though she smiled through them. "And you keep haunting mine," she whispered. "Not haunting," his voice murmured, warm as wind against her ear. "Guarding." She closed her eyes. "I still miss you." "Then remember me," he said. "Not as a ghost, but as the balance we made together. As long as there is warmth in the snow and snow in the warmth, I am here." When she opened her eyes, the fire had returned to its normal glow. The silver light was gone. But on the parchment before her, where her quill had lain idle, a single word had appeared, written in fine, deliberate script that was not her own. Endure. That spring, Hermione journeyed south for the first time in many years. The ministry had requested her presence to discuss the shifting balance of magic. Though the borders were open and trade between the kingdoms flourished, there remained unease among the southern wizards. They feared the North's power had grown too strong, that the ley lines now favoured frost over flame. Hermione rode with a small escort down through the thawing valleys and into the green fields of Yorkshire. The journey felt both foreign and familiar. When she reached the outskirts of London, she was struck by how unchanged it all seemed. The bustling streets, the golden spires of the ministry, the smell of parchment and rain. Yet within her, something vast and ancient stirred, a reminder that she was no longer quite the same woman who had once walked these halls. The council greeted her with polite curiosity, but she could see their unease. They whispered of the strange aura around her, how frost melted at her touch, and candle flames bent toward her like loyal pets. The bond she had forged with the ley lines had marked her forever. During the council session, Hermione stood before the gathered ministers and spoke plainly. "The balance between our lands is not a threat," she said. "It is a covenant. The magic of the world has remembered what we forgot, that unity is its natural state. The North will not rise against the South, nor will the South dominate the North. We are one world again." Some nodded in agreement. Others exchanged wary glances. Burke, now aging but still sharp, leaned forward. "And what of the King of the North, Minister Granger? Is it true that he lives in some spectral form tied to the mountain's heart?" Hermione paused, her eyes distant. "He lives as the North lives," she said at last, "and the North endures." When she returned home weeks later, the kingdom welcomed her with banners and music. Yet Hermione found her solace not in celebration, but in quiet. She spent her evenings walking the restored gardens of the citadel, where the first blossoms of frost lilies glowed under the moonlight. It was there one night, beneath the arch of the silver aurora, that she saw it. A single streak of light descending from the mountains. It shimmered like molten ice, trailing sparks of blue and gold before fading into the horizon. The guards called it a meteor. The scholars called it a phenomenon of magic. But Hermione knew. She lifted her face to the sky and whispered, "I see you." The wind stirred around her, cool and kind. For a moment, it carried the faintest echo of laughter, his laughter, and the scent of snow blooming over spring earth. Hermione closed her eyes, feeling the balance within and around her, the endless dance of sun and snow. She thought of how far they had come, of all they had lost and gained. There would always be change, always the threat of imbalance, but now she understood what Draco had given her. Not peace without struggle, but the courage to keep choosing it. And so the story of the North did not end in tragedy, nor in triumph, but in harmony. The frost no longer ruled, nor did the fire. Together they lived, eternal and equal, bound not by chains, but by choice. And in that fragile, luminous peace, Hermione Granger, scholar, warrior, queen of no crown, finally found her rest. Years rolled by, as softly and steadily as snow over stone. The world healed itself in small, patient ways. Rivers thawed, forests crept northward, and children born beneath sunlight played where frost once ruled. The North had become a place of wonder, no longer feared but revered. A kingdom of balance, where warmth and cold, fire and frost lived in harmony. The Southerners called it the land of two seasons. To the people of the North, it was simply home. And at its heart stood the Northern Crown, a citadel of pale stone and silver towers that gleamed beneath the auroras. The castle was different now. Vines climbed its battlements, flowers bloomed in courtyards where only icicles had hung before. Yet amid all its beauty, one tower remained untouched, preserved in its winter stillness. There, Hermione Granger kept her study, surrounded by books and quiet. She had aged, though gently. Her curls were threaded with silver now, and fine lines touched her eyes. Not from sorrow, but from years of watching the horizon with hope. Time had not dulled her magic. If anything, it had deepened it. The air around her still shimmered faintly, a mingling of warmth and chill, as if the two forces that had once warred within the world had settled into her very being. It was said that she could call the rains in midsummer or summon blossoms in midwinter. But Hermione herself rarely used such power. Her magic had become something quieter, the power to mend what was broken, to calm what was restless, to remind her people that peace was worth protecting. Yet, for all the calm of those later years, there remained one truth she could not escape. The mountains still whispered. Some nights she would wake from dreams of light and shadow, of frost turning to flame, of a voice calling her name through the wind. She would rise, wrap herself in her cloak, and climb to the highest balcony to listen. The wind always carried something familiar, not words, but memory. And though it had been decades since that night when Draco Malfoy became one with the ley lines, his presence had never truly faded. On the eve of the 20th year since the Frostbane's fall, the Northern Crown celebrated the Festival of Renewal. It was a tradition born from the people themselves, a day of songs and feasts, of gratitude for the sun that now touched their land. Hermione walked among the crowds that evening, smiling at the laughter of children, the smell of roasted chestnuts, the bright lanterns drifting into the sky. Every face she passed was open and joyful, the kind of peace she had once thought impossible. "Minister!" a young girl called, running to her with a wreath of snow lilies. "For you." Hermione knelt to accept it, the flowers cool and delicate in her hands. "Thank you," she said warmly. "You've made this yourself." The girl nodded proudly. "My mama says they only bloom where the Queen's magic touches the ground." Hermione smiled, though a pang went through her chest. "Your mother gives me too much credit. These flowers bloom because the land remembers kindness." The girl tilted her head. The land remembers you." Before Hermione could answer, the child had darted back into the crowd, leaving her with a wreath and a heart suddenly heavier than before. As dusk deepened into night, the celebrations moved to the central square. Music swelled, and the air shimmered with lantern light. Hermione stood at the edge, watching the dancers whirl. Then, as the first stars appeared, a soft tremor rippled beneath her feet. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but her senses caught it instantly. Her smile faded. She left the festival quietly, slipping away through the winding corridors of the citadel. The tremor had not been an illusion. The ley lines were stirring. In the distance, beyond the city walls, the mountain gleamed faintly under the aurora, the same mountain where the Frostbane had once been born. Hermione climbed to the highest tower and looked out. A pale light was pulsing beneath the mountain's crown, slow and steady like a heartbeat. The sight sent a chill through her, though not from fear. She could feel it, the magic, old and familiar, calling to her across the cold air. "Draco," she whispered. The wind shifted, carrying a whisper that was not her imagination. "Hermione." Her breath caught. The sound came again, clearer now. Not a ghost's moan, but a voice woven through the mountain itself. The balance wavers. Hermione's pulse quickened. "No, the ley lines have been stable for decades." "The world changes," the voice murmured, soft as snow. "Magic is never still. It bends. It breathes. It must be tended again." She closed her eyes, heart aching. "You mean it needs another sacrifice?" Silence answered her, but she already knew. The following morning, the sky was the color of pewter. Hermione summoned the council. The lords and scholars gathered in anxious confusion as she spread her maps across the table. The ley lines that had once glowed evenly now flickered with patches of imbalance. "The convergence beneath the mountain is shifting," she explained. "The magic we restored is restless. It's searching for a new equilibrium." Lord Mornath's grandson, now grey-haired himself, frowned deeply. "Can it be repaired?" "Yes," she said, though her tone carried no comfort. "But not by the old ways. The bond forged between the sun and snow still holds, but it has weakened. It needs renewal." "And how is that done?" another asked. Hermione's gaze drifted to the window, toward the distant peaks. "Through union, not of nations, but of souls." A murmur swept through the room. "My lady," Mornath's grandson said hesitantly, "surely you don't mean—" "I do," Hermione said softly. "The ley lines are calling, and I will answer." That night she went alone to the mountain. She wore no armor, only her traveling cloak and the simple silver circlet that marked her as the keeper of balance. The climb was steep, but the path remembered her steps. When she reached the ancient cavern, the runes along the walls flared to life, golden and blue. The air was alive with magic, wild, yearning, half asleep. Hermione knelt in the center of the chamber, the same place where she and Draco had once stood side by side. The stone beneath her pulsed with power. "I'm here," she whispered. "I know what you want." The light intensified, spiraling upward in threads of frost and fire. Within it, she felt his presence. Not a ghost, not memory, but a consciousness vast and tender. "You came." Tears welled in her eyes. "You think I could have stayed away?" "You've done enough," he said. "You gave the world its peace. And now it needs me again." She replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "But I won't do this alone. I never could." The light swirled around her, warm and cold at once. Then we'll finish it together." Hermione closed her eyes, surrendering to the magic. It rose around her like a tide, gentle and powerful, drawing her into its current. She felt his presence enfold her, not as a separate being, but as part of herself, two halves once more united. The mountain shuddered. The ley lines blazed. Across the north, the sky erupted in ribbons of gold and silver, dancing from horizon to horizon. The people looked up in awe, thinking it a blessing. And perhaps it was. For when the light faded, the balance had been restored again, stronger, deeper, eternal. The world exhaled, at peace. In the centuries that followed, stories would be told of the twin sovereigns, the King of Snow and the Witch of the Sun, whose love had remade the world twice over. Some said they lived still, as spirits of the mountain. Others swore they became the magic itself, the breath of every spell, the light in every dawn. But those who walked the high valleys on clear nights claimed that if you stood quiet enough, you could see two figures walking side by side beneath the aurora, one cloaked in silver, the other in gold. And from the wind above came a voice, soft and certain. The world endures. The balance holds. The sun and snow are one. Time moved differently in the north. Seasons lingered, each reluctant to give way to the next. The sun shone longer now, but its warmth came gently, never scorching. The snows that fell in winter melted into streams that glimmered like molten glass, and the forests flourished where once there had been only stone. The people of both realms, the south of flame and the north of frost, spoke of an age of unity, and none remembered the wars that had once divided them. And yet, the northern crown still stood as it had always stood, proud, serene, and a little haunted. At the summit of its tallest tower, where the wind sang endlessly across the peaks, a woman with silver-streaked curls and eyes of steady amber gazed out at the horizon. Hermione had not aged as mortals do. The bond forged with the ley lines had slowed her years. Though decades had passed since her second descent into the mountain, she remained unchanged, ageless, though not untouched by time. The people still called her the keeper of the crown. They said she was the heart of balance, the living bridge between sun and snow. But to Hermione, titles meant little. Her days were filled with study and counsel, her nights with quiet reflection. She had learned that the world did not need saving every hour. Sometimes it only needed tending. Yet the nights were the hardest. For when the winds rose and the auroras danced, she felt him most, Draco. His presence pulsed faintly within the ley lines that crisscrossed the land. In those moments, she would close her eyes and feel the rhythm of his magic merging with hers, steady as a heartbeat. She could almost hear him breathing beside her, whispering words only the wind remembered. Endure. One morning, as frost glistened upon the castle stones, a messenger arrived from the far south. He bore the crimson seal of the southern ministry and bowed deeply before Hermione's counsel. "Minister Granger," he said, his voice trembling with reverence and unease. "The southern lands call for aid. The ley lines near the desert of Lyria are changing. The earth trembles. Magic there grows wild." The council murmured anxiously, but Hermione remained calm. "The lines seek balance again," she said. "It is the nature of the world. It does not threaten us. It calls us." The messenger hesitated. "The scholars fear a fracture. They say the magic bends toward darkness." Hermione's brow furrowed. "Darkness?" "Yes, my lady. They say it whispers with a voice of frost. For the first time in many years, Hermione felt a chill that was not from the northern wind. That night, she walked alone through the quiet halls of the citadel. The moonlight spilled across the stone, pale and pure. She found her way to the library, where shelves stretched like forests of memory. She touched the spines of books she and Draco had once studied together, their ink faded, but their magic intact. Frost whispered under her fingertips, faint and familiar. "Draco," she murmured, her breath a cloud in the dim air. "What are you trying to tell me?" The torches flickered, though no wind stirred. From the shadows above, a faint hum arose, low, steady, like the heartbeat of the mountain. She followed the sound down through the corridors, through the great hall, and at last to the old stone door that led to the caverns below. The runes upon it glowed faintly blue. Hermione laid her palm against the cold surface, and the door yielded with a soft sigh. The tunnels beyond were exactly as she remembered, dark, endless, humming with dormant power. Yet the deeper she went, the stronger the pull became. The air vibrated with the same ancient energy that had once bound her life to Draco's. When she reached the heart of the cavern, the runes were burning with light. The ley lines shimmered in strands of gold and silver, but now a new thread wove among them, blue as midnight, cold as sorrow. Something new has awoken, she thought, or something old has returned. She knelt beside the nexus and pressed her hand to the stone. "Show me," she whispered. At once, the cavern filled with light. She saw visions, vast deserts shrouded in storm, rivers turning to glass, and people crying out as the ground froze beneath their feet. And amid it all, she heard a voice that made her heart falter. "You left me unfinished." The light dimmed. Hermione staggered back, her breath coming hard. "No," she whispered, "it can't be you." But the mountain trembled, and the voice came again, stronger, colder. "You merged the magic, but not the will. Part of me remained, waiting in the dark. The Frostbane." Hermione returned to the surface with dawn, her mind racing. The Frostbane had not perished. It had survived within the ley lines, dormant, fractured, but alive. It was no longer a curse of cold or flame, but a consciousness of imbalance, born from the very union that had once saved the world. She gathered the council and spoke plainly. "The Frostbane stirs once more," she said, "but it is not as before. It seeks not destruction, but identity. It is lost, half light, half shadow." Lord Mornath's descendant looked at her in fear. "Can it be destroyed again?" Hermione shook her head. "No, it is part of us now, of the magic that sustains our world. To destroy it would be to unravel all that we have restored, but it can be healed." "How?" "By reminding it what balance truly means." That night, she stood again upon the balcony of the highest tower. The auroras shimmered above, swirling in hues of gold and sapphire. She raised her wand to the sky and whispered words of binding, words that called to the heart of the world. The wind howled, carrying voices that were not human. The ley lines trembled beneath her feet. Then, through the storm, she felt him again. Hermione. Her heart leapt. "Draco!" "You cannot heal what was never broken," his voice said, distant yet near. "The Frostbane is not evil. It is the shadow of our union, the part that fears, the part that doubts. It needs understanding, not battle." She closed her eyes, tears tracing her cheeks. "Then help me show it." The wind quieted. Always. Hermione descended from the tower and walked into the night. Beyond the city, where frost met grass, she knelt and touched the earth. The ley lines pulsed beneath her hand, fierce and trembling. "I know you," she whispered to the darkness. "You were born of pain, of pride, of love too stubborn to die. You are not my enemy." The frost rose around her, forming a veil of blue light. The air grew heavy with power. Then, in that stillness, a figure emerged, neither man nor beast, but something beautiful and terrible. Its eyes glowed like twin stars, its form shifting between mist and flame. "Why do you call me?" it asked, its voice echoing through her mind. "You gave me death, then life. What am I now?" Hermione met its gaze without fear. "You are what remains when both halves forget they are one. You are the space between light and dark, the breath between fire and frost. You are balance unremembered, but not lost." The creature's form trembled, flickering. "Balance?" it whispered. Hermione held out her hand. "Come home." For a moment the world held its breath. Then the frostlight surged forward, enveloping her. It entered her like breath, like memory, like forgiveness. The ground steadied. The storm ceased. When Hermione opened her eyes, the night sky was clear once more. The ley lines glowed softly beneath the earth, steady and serene. And within her heart, she felt it, the Frostbane's presence, no longer cold, no longer cruel, but whole. The balance had been restored again. When dawn broke, the people of the north found their keeper standing in the fields, her hair shining like moonlight, her cloak dusted with frost. She looked peaceful, ageless, radiant. They did not know what had transpired, only that the air itself felt purer. In the days that followed, they whispered that their queen had spoken to the soul of the world and tamed it with kindness. And though she never claimed the title, they built her statues in both lands. Hermione Granger, keeper of balance, the woman who healed the heart of magic itself. And in every legend that followed, there was always mention of the wind that whispered beside her name, low and eternal, "The sun and snow endure." In the twilight years of her life, Hermione Granger lived as both legend and mystery. The world had changed around her. Cities rebuilt, magic learned to flow gently again, and children were born who had never known a time of fear. Yet in the heart of the Northern Crown, where frost and flame met in harmony, she remained as she had always been, quiet, steadfast, and unyieldingly watchful. The centuries seemed to bend around her. Her face was serene, touched by age, yet unclaimed by it. The bond she shared with the ley lines, the endless pulse of sun and snow, kept her alive beyond the reach of mortal years. She was no longer only a woman, nor merely a witch. She was a part of the land itself, the keeper of its heart. Each morning, as dawn spilled gold across the mountains, she would stand upon the eastern balcony. Below her, rivers glimmered like threads of glass, and far to the south, she could see where the warmth of summer embraced the horizon. The air was always calm here, balanced perfectly between chill and comfort. The world was at peace, but peace, she knew, was not stillness. It was the fragile breath between storms. She had seen enough of history to know that nothing truly ended. Magic shifted, kingdoms rose and fell, and new powers always stirred in forgotten corners of the world. Yet Hermione had also learned that endings were not to be feared. Endings made room for beginnings. That spring, the Northern Crown hosted a gathering unlike any before it. Wizards from every realm, from the deserts of Lyria to the Isles of Dormand, travelled to the citadel. They came to speak of unity, to celebrate 100 years of peace, and to honour the woman who had kept the balance between sun and snow. The hall blazed with light that night. Silver banners hung beside golden ones, their threads woven together in intricate patterns that shimmered like aurora silk. Musicians played, and laughter echoed from the vaulted ceilings. Hermione walked among them slowly, her robes a deep blue that rippled like twilight. As she passed, conversations stilled and heads bowed. It embarrassed her still. She had never grown used to reverence. She preferred questions to praise. "Keeper," said a young scholar, bowing so low his glasses nearly slipped from his nose. "Is it true you once spoke with the Frostbane itself?" Hermione smiled. "It's true that I once misunderstood it, which, I think, is what most of us do with things we fear." The boy blinked, uncertain, then nodded solemnly as though she had spoken prophecy. She continued through the hall, smiling softly to herself. At the high table, the leaders of the southern provinces rose to greet her. Lord Eamon Burke, grandson of the man who had once questioned her every choice, raised a glass. "To the keeper of balance," he said, "to the woman who united two worlds." The hall erupted in applause, though Hermione merely inclined her head. When the noise faded, she spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the vaulted chamber. "I thank you," she said. "But remember, it was not I who united the realms. It was all of us. Each generation chose peace when war might have been easier. Remember that peace is not a crown to be worn. It's a garden to be tended." Her words settled over them like soft snow. For a moment, the hall was utterly still. Then came the sound of many hands clapping, slow, reverent, and true. After the feast, Hermione retreated from the celebration, as she often did. The music grew distant behind her as she climbed the stairway to the highest tower. Outside, the night sky stretched vast and unbroken, jeweled with stars. The aurora shimmered faintly above the peaks, threads of gold and blue twisting together like the memory of a promise. She stood there for a long while, listening to the wind. It had always spoken to her, sometimes faintly, sometimes clear as thought. Tonight, it carried a familiar warmth, like breath against her cheek. "Hermione." Her eyes softened. "You always find me when it's quiet. You always listen when it matters," came the answer. His voice was like distant thunder softened by snow. "It's been a century," she whispered, "and still you sound the same." "And you look the same," the voice teased gently. "I suppose neither of us knows how to leave well enough alone." She laughed, the sound low and fond. "If eternity means listening to you argue with me through the wind, I'll manage." You always did. The silence between them was full, not empty, but rich with memory. "I wish they could see you," she said quietly. "They think you're gone. I am here, not as before, but here. You know that." "I do." She placed her hand on the stone railing, feeling the faint hum beneath it, the pulse of the ley lines, steady and alive. "But sometimes I wish I could see you again, just once." The wind stirred, gentle as a sigh. Then, before her eyes, the aurora brightened. The colours deepened, twisting into a single ribbon of gold and silver that descended toward her. Slowly, it took shape, tall, cloaked in light, with eyes like pale fire. Hermione's breath caught. "Draco," she whispered. He smiled faintly, as though time itself bowed before that small expression. "You called me back." "I didn't mean to." "I know," he said softly. but I came anyway." He stepped closer, and though his form shimmered like mist, she could feel the warmth radiating from him. His hand brushed hers, not solid, not ghostly, but something in between. "You kept your promise," he said. "The world endures." "So it does," she murmured. "But the balance trembles sometimes. It's never as easy as we hoped." "It never was," he said. "But you never needed easy." Hermione smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "I could say the same of you." They stood there beneath the aurora, the ancient kingdom stretched out below them, quiet, alive, eternal. For a heartbeat, it was as though the years fell away. They were simply two souls again, standing at the edge of a world they had remade. "Do you regret it?" she asked finally. "The choice we made?" Draco's gaze held hers, steady as the mountain. "No. Love freely given was never loss. It was the beginning of everything." A soft wind rose, carrying his words into the night. His form began to fade, dissolving into threads of light. "Will I see you again?" Hermione whispered. His voice lingered, warm as sunlight through frost. "When the world needs balance once more, when the sun forgets the snow, or the snow forgets the sun, I'll find you." She closed her eyes, letting the wind brush her cheeks like a farewell kiss. Until then. When the dawn came, the people of the north awoke to find the sky burning with color, ribbons of gold and silver that danced above the mountains for 3 days and nights. They called it the crown of light. Scholars said it was the magic of the ley lines renewing once more. But the old ones, those who remembered the tales of the sun and snow, said it was a sign that the keepers had met again. Hermione stood on the balcony that morning, her hands resting on the stone railing. The air was warm against her skin. Below, her people celebrated, their songs echoing faintly up through the towers. She smiled, eyes lifted to the sky. There was no sadness in her anymore, no grief, only peace, the deep, still kind that comes after a storm. For she knew, as surely as she had known anything in her long life, that love, once freely given, never truly ended. It became part of the world, in the sunlight on the snow, in the laughter of children, in the quiet breath between heartbeats. And as the wind rose gently around her, she heard him once more, faint and steady. The world endures. The balance holds. The sun and snow are one.